Good evening, everyone. This is Dr. Ryan Truchelut of WeatherTiger, and I'm here to bring you the very latest on Hurricane Milton, a Category 5 hurricane in the southern Gulf of Mexico on approach to Florida. I'll be talking all about the surge, the wind, and the rain impacts that it'll have on our state starting tomorrow and continuing through Thursday. I'm going to allow a couple minutes for the audience to come in, and then I'll get right into the very latest on this exceptionally dangerous storm. Okay, folks, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Once again, I'm Dr. Ryan Truchelut of WeatherTiger, and I'm going to be telling you what is going on with this incredibly powerful, incredibly dangerous storm on approach to Florida. This is Hurricane Milton. It is a Category 5 hurricane in the southern Gulf of Mexico, and you can see it looks absolutely the way you don't want a hurricane to look when it's on approach to our state. Uh, it's very well organized tonight. You can see it has a lot of deep, very strong convection, perfectly circular, ring that a clear eye. There's been eye wall lightning ongoing all day today, and this thing is really wrapped up. So let's get right into the forecast. Let's talk about first. Let's start with the key messages from the National Hurricane Center that the forecasters there want to convey to you, the public. And those key messages are that there's a large destructive storm surge coming. There's devastating hurricane force winds coming to portions of the west coast of Florida, and there's widespread heavy rainfall causing the potential for catastrophic, life threatening flash and urban flooding across a lot of central and north Florida, north central Florida as well over the next few days. So we've got a surge threat, we've got a wind threat, and we've got a heavy rainfall threat. So the big three are well represented with Hurricane Milton. This is the National Hurricane Center's experimental forecast cone, which shows those inland wind warnings as well as the track forecast. As of the 7 p.m. intermediate advisory, sustained winds a whopping 165 miles per hour. Cat 5 starts at 160, so that is over that threshold. Movement still east northeast at around 10 miles per hour tonight. And you can see the expectations are that Milton will be moving northeast through the day tomorrow, and then it'll kind of bend back towards the east northeast as it comes into the state of Florida, in west central Florida, or kind of the northern part of southwest Florida, Gulf Coast, overnight Wednesday evening into early Thursday morning. These areas in red, those are your hurricane warnings. So inland hurricane warnings over most of central Florida, pretty much all of it. These areas in blue, those are your tropical storm warnings. So most of the rest of the state, with the exception of the Panhandle. And that forecast has not changed all that much in absolute terms since yesterday, but there are some key shifts here during the day that I'll talk about more in depth. You can see the darkest blue line is the current National Hurricane Center forecast from 5 p.m. These lighter blue lines are where the forecast was yesterday. And we can see there has been a little bit of a southward shift in that forecast track. So whereas previously the landfall point was somewhere in Tampa Bay. Now it's a bit south. It's more most likely landfall point Bradenton or Sarasota. Now, obviously, a hurricane is not a point. and there will be significant impacts of this storm well away from the center. So on one hand, we don't want to obsess about exactly where the center is going to track, but that is very key for who gets the worst of the storm surge. So we'll be talking about that in just a minute, but that southward trend is something that we've seen today as Milton has deviated just a bit south of its forecast track during the day today. Just wanted to show you the latest intensity forecast at the bottom of the Hurricane Center's 5 p.m. discussion, still highlighting the risk of Milton being one of the most destructive hurricanes on record for West Central Florida. That language has been in there since yesterday. There are those key messages: 1, 2, 3, surge, wind, rainfall, and here's that intensity forecast. Category 5 hurricane, likely to stay that way for at least another 6 to 12 hours. Start to gradually bring down those maximum sustained winds to a Category 4 by tomorrow night, and then overnight into early Thursday morning, potentially falling to a 3. But I want to emphasize that's not really weakening, because what's happening is we're sort of exchanging the very highest sustained winds for a broader area of wind, broader wind field. So that doesn't really mean the storm's weakening. It kind of means it's spreading out as it approaches the mid-latitude. So we have Air Force and NOAA hurricane hunters have been flying around through Milton all day today. Now, if you recall, last night I was talking about Milton having pressures that were below 900 millibars, a minimum pressure in its eye of around 897 millibars, which is top 5 lowest pressure ever in the Atlantic, Gulf, or the Caribbean. So that pressure came up overnight as Milton underwent what's called an eye wall replacement cycle, where it had a tiny eye that was about 5 miles wide, and that was replaced overnight by this morning with an eye that was about 15 miles wide. That eye has then shrunk down again over the course of the day, down to, again, about 8 to 10 miles wide. And as it did that, that's when Milton ramped back up from a Category 4 back to a Category 5 hurricane again. Does look like that cycle of intensification has peaked out. Minimum pressures are still extremely impressive at around 910 millibars on the Hurricane Hunter's last few passes through the center, but it's not falling anymore, and that central pressure is maybe just up a tad. So we may be back in another phase where the storm is spreading out rather than having the very highest maximum sustained winds right around that core. But oh my, what a core it is. This is data from the Doppler radar on the back of the NOAA Hurricane Hunter tail Doppler radar. Gives us an unparalleled look at dissecting the storm in real time. And this doom donut in here, all these kind of pinks, that's your area where you have winds aloft of 150, 160 knots right around that 8 to 10 mile wide eye wall. So those are winds aloft that suggest that Category 5 winds are occurring at the surface. So we have good observations on that in real time, and it's really putting on a show tonight, exactly what we don't want to see for something that's threatening the state of Florida. Now, there's been a lot of talk today about wobbles. People are understandably obsessed with whether Milton is deviating right or left of the forecast track, because every mile does matter for who gets the worst of the surge and whether Tampa Bay gets that worst surge. So this is just a product that kind of overlays those center passes of the planes flying around through the center of the storm, finding out exactly where it is. And as of a few hours ago, maybe there was a little bit of deviation to the south of that 5 p.m. track, but it looks to me like it basically is now paralleling that track. So there's really no big difference from what's going on right now and what the Hurricane Center forecast track in the short term was. So we'll keep watching. Obviously, every inch counts, but as of right now, it doesn't look like anything majorly or drastically different than what the Hurricane Center is forecasting is happening. I'm not going to talk too much about the basically what the forecast is in terms of what the storm is going to do, because I want to talk mostly about impacts tonight. I do want to show this one satellite loop. This is water vapor imagery. So looking down from space, this shows us where the moisture is kind of in the middle of the atmosphere, that layer from 2 to 4 miles up. It's pretty key for determining steering, and it also shows us where kind of the moisture is that will sustain those intense thunderstorms to drive and power a hurricane circulation. Nice thing about intense hurricanes is that the outflow kind of shows you where the storm wants to go. So you can see all this air that's coming in through Milton is then coming up and out, and it's first kind of going north, and then it's heading out to the east here. So the outflow does, so too the storm is likely to do, making that northeast move and then turning more eastward as it goes over the Florida Peninsula on Thursday, following that outflow channel. Not going to come up to North Florida, not going to go east and go into South Florida, heading right for West Central Florida. And really, the reason why that that matters, the inches count this time, is because you have the Tampa Bay region, a metropolitan area of 3.5 million people, right in this area, and the track that the Hurricane Center is forecasting is very, very close to the Tampa Bay region. It's been over Tampa Bay, a day and a half ago, right into the mouth of Tampa Bay. Ticked a little bit south in the last 12 hours, down now to where the most likely landfall point per NHC is in the Sarasota vicinity, and then a track east-northeast that exits around Melbourne. So again, that really matters because it's going to matter for who gets the surge. So let's talk about the surge threat. So this is the reasonable worst case storm surge forecast from the National Hurricane Center. So not everybody is going to get the surge that's outlined in this region, but someone is going to get the worst case, and they're outlining at the NHC those regions where this is the reasonable worst case that you might get. So still forecasting as yesterday, 10 to 15 feet of storm surge between Anclote River, including all of Tampa Bay, south to Inglewood, Charlotte Harbor. As that forecast track has edged a little bit south, your expected surge is now up from 6 to 10 feet to 8 to 12 feet, which that'd be the storm of the century if it wasn't for Ian happening 2 years ago. But this is an exceptional and extreme and life-threatening surge in and of its own right. Further south along the southwest Florida coast, again, still looking at anywhere from 5 to 8 feet of storm surge here in the further south, densely populated parts of southwest Florida, Marco Island, Naples area. Further north, again, this is kind of conditional surge up here in the Nature Coast. That would be if the hurricane was to deviate north of track and make landfall along the Nature Coast, you could see these 5 to 10 foot numbers. I don't think that's going to happen, but this is the reasonable worst case, so they're putting down that marker. Another thing I want to show here, and again, this is such a complex storm and there's so much going on, I think this has been undersold a little bit. All of the Atlantic coast, basically Brevard County north to the Florida-Georgia border, 3 to 5 feet of storm surge expected here as well. And that's quite significant. Storm surge warnings in effect not only for the Gulf Coast tonight, but also for the Atlantic coast from the Space Coast north into coastal Georgia. As we get that wraparound wind out of the northeast, that's going to drive that surge into the northeast Florida coast as well. So that's going to be a significant event there. So what do we know with some degree of confidence? This is the National Hurricane Center's model of storm surge, and this is the 50% chance of exceedance. So 50% chance that you have more surge than this, 50% chance there's less. So the regions where we're the most confident in there being damaging, severe storm surge, it's those areas that are likely to be either along or south of track, no matter which of these courses it takes, whether it comes into Tampa Bay or Bradenton, more down towards Englewood. If you're down here in Charlotte Harbor, you're going to be on that portion of the circulation where you're going to have onshore flow. You're going to have onshore flow in Naples and Marco Island. So surge is coming here. These areas highlighted here, you have a better than 50% chance of seeing these storm surge values on the order of 6 to 10 feet, just as the National Hurricane Center is forecasting. So this is a model of what the surge is likely to be across southwest Florida if Milton exactly follows the forecast as laid out by the 5 p.m. NHC advisory in terms of its track, intensity, how big it is, all those sorts of things. So on that track, with that intense onshore flow associated with the eye wall pushing ashore sometime here in the overnight hours of late Wednesday into early Thursday, that is going to drive those extreme surge values into Charlotte Harbor, Venice, Sarasota, further south, even into Fort Myers and Cape Coral. This is going to be a major, major surge event here. Really in most scenarios, but this is certainly on the NHC track, and even if it shifts further south as well. I also want to show what would happen if the track was a little more to the north and west than the NHC track. So this is a track that just shifts that forecast track by just about 30 miles to the north. And that's a very normal error for a forecast that's a day and a half out. That's a standard amount of error. The average error is about 60 nautical miles. So it's just shifting by half of that. Now you're talking about a track that's moved from a landfall point near Sarasota to a landfall right up into Tampa Bay. And if that happens, then Tampa Bay, you are getting the onshore flow. You're not getting the offshore flow that you would if the track was down towards Sarasota. And now you can see that broad area of those reds and oranges, those surge values exceeding 10 feet across a lot of Pinellas and Hillsborough counties. So that's why those evacuation orders are so important, because if Milton follows its exact track, Tampa will luck out in terms of surge, and you'll be able to look to your south and see what you avoided and know that you avoided something awful. But it's very possible that that track shifts back to the north. There's trustworthy models that show a more northerly trajectory into Tampa Bay. Are they going to be right? I don't know. Nobody knows that. What I can tell you is that we are within wobble range of the track of Milton going directly into Tampa Bay. I was up here in Tallahassee watching every single slight shift, slight deviation of track, sweating it until the very end to see whether or not we were going to get the eye wall of Helene. And in Tampa Bay, it's going to be exactly the same way. It's going to come down to, you won't know what the track is going to be until a few hours before this makes landfall, in my opinion. So that's why those evacuation orders are life-saving, because a small shift in track, something random, something that we can't predict or forecast as meteorologists, could easily put Tampa Bay right back in the line of fire for surge. You're going to have a big wind event anyway, but the surge threat will come right back into the forecast if we deviate back to the north. So obviously we keep a very close eye on that. It'll go right down to the wire, and we'll be watching it tick by tick tomorrow. I do also want to show this is the surge forecast for northeast Florida, east central Florida, with those northeasterly winds that are going to be coming on the north side of the circulation. Again, this is a high probability that you're going to be seeing these surge values on the order of 3 to 5 feet all the way from Brevard County north through Jacksonville, St. Johns River, and north into coastal Georgia as well. 3 to 5 feet of storm surge for Brunswick, Savannah area as well. So that's certainly something to take seriously on the Atlantic side. I don't want to give that short shrift because it's going to be quite impactful. Changing gears, let's talk a little bit about the wind threat. As that track has shifted a little bit south, the area that's most targeted by the National Weather Service's hurricane threats and impacts wind risk product for the potential region of wind gusts greater than 110 miles per hour here in purple that can cause structural damage to buildings. All of the Tampa Bay area still under the gun. West Central Florida, Southwest Florida, south into the Charlotte Harbor region. Not everybody in this area in purple is going to get those 100, 110 mile per hour plus winds. You're going to have to, it'll be the people who get the eye wall. But someone in this range is probably going to get those extremely destructive, extremely damaging winds. And even if the track shifts south, I do think that there's a possibility that the most damaging winds might not be where you'd expect them to be. They might be on the north side of the circulation. So as Milton will be moving northeast here across the Gulf of Mexico, this is a plot of Shear You can see it goes from this region where it is right now, where the shear is pretty favorable. It's 15 to 20 knots. That's something that a powerful hurricane can deal with. It's going to be moving into this region where shear is much higher, 30, 40 knots. Category 5 hurricane can push some of this shear out of the way, but not all of it. It's going to be moving into a less favorable environment to be a tight, well-organized system as it moves north. And that is going to do something interesting here with transferring some of the energy to the north side of the circulation. So this is the HAFS-A U.S. hurricane model. Let's roll it forward with time. This is this afternoon. Here's where we are now. You can see as we go through the day tomorrow, look at those greens, yellows, and purples expand. Those are your tropical storm force winds in green and yellow, and your hurricane force wind radii expanding as we move towards landfall in the overnight hours Wednesday into Thursday. So even as we spread out that wind field, we're kind of breaking down the core a little bit. The core is embattled by shears, maybe pulling in some drier air towards landfall, but we really are bringing in, we're kind of enhancing that wind on the north side of the circulation as the hurricane interacts with a fast moving streak of the jet stream to its north. So it kind of might be this band kind of north of the center where we're getting more of those stronger winds coming down to the surface more reliably. I don't know that this is currently reflected in some of the wind forecasts that are being put out. This is the National Weather Service's top wind gust map. So it's this region kind of in here in these reds where that's your region where National Weather Service is looking for the chance of hurricane force wind gusts. If we go back to the hurricane threats and impacts product, I'll show you exactly where that is. It's this area outlined in red. That's your area that where you might catch what's left of the core of Milton as it moves across the state. I'd say that this area in red here, that's your area where you're probably going to see wind gusts top out in the 60 to 80 mile per hour range. So for Central Florida, East Central Florida, Orlando, I don't think you're going to see the 100 plus mile per hour gusts that Tampa or Bradenton or Sarasota might see, or that Orlando saw in Hurricane Charlie in 2004. I think Orlando is going to see those kind of 60, 70, 75, 80 mile per hour wind gusts that that East Central Florida has seen several times. Obviously damaging events in their own right, but Irma's impacts on Orlando, Ian's impacts on Orlando, Hurricane Jean back in 2004, something like that comes to mind. One other thing I also want to point out, I want to watch this section of the coastline here from Daytona Beach, St. Augustine, Palm Coast. I'm thinking that this section of the coastline might well see hurricane force wind gusts as well, even though it's not explicitly shown here on this map. And that's just with that enhancement of the winds on the north and northwestern side of the circulation due to its interaction with the jet stream. So we'll keep an eye on that, but I would be very on guard in Brevard, Volusia, Flagler counties for the potential for some stronger wind gusts, maybe even than what's in the forecast right now from the National Weather Service. Elsewhere across the state, lower wind risk, South Florida, areas south of Lake Okeechobee that aren't along the Gulf. I'd say probably 40, 50, maybe an occasional 60 mile per hour wind gust as you go further north. And then north central Florida as well. I'd be watching for 40 to 60 mile per hour wind gusts here, kind of the Jacksonville, Gainesville, Lake City area as well during the day. During Thursday morning, probably the worst of it there. I do want to go forward and also talk about rain, because rain is going to be a significant impact of the storm as well. This is the latest precip outlook for the storm as a whole. And you can kind of see that enhancement, even though we're making landfall down here in Sarasota, tracking over towards Melbourne. You can see that the highest rain is expected to be north of that circulation center, so kind of along I-4, and then just north, these areas outlined in red. 10 to 15 inches of rainfall, certainly in spots, maybe not for everybody. And then this kind of broader area of 4 to 8 inches of rainfall across a lot of north central Florida. And of course, west central Florida, east central Florida as well. Lower totals across South Florida because we're going to be bringing in some drier air on the south side of that circulation. And then up towards the Big Bend. A little bit of peripheral rain gets into the eastern Big Bend. I don't think Tallahassee or the Panhandle see anything from this. Maybe a shower or two, nothing significant. Right now, we have not a ton going on the radar. There's some light to moderate rain over south central Florida. We'll see more heavier rainfall spreading over the southern part of the state. Do want to draw your attention down here. You can see these are little supercells hanging out offshore. Each of those is a thunderstorm that is rotating pretty strongly, and as this kind of moves north and inland, that lift, that turning, I'd be watching for a tornado threat into early tomorrow morning across South Florida, and then maybe across South Central or East Central Florida tomorrow afternoon as well, with tornadoes potentially embedded in those bands. And these are when you add it up, this is the flood risk product put out by the National Weather Service. Had a lot of rainfall in the Florida Peninsula recently. Areas along the west coast got quite a bit of rainfall from Helene. East Coast has seen some rainfall, pretty heavy rainfall, a few inches at least over the last few days. So this corridor, I-4 corridor from Tampa to Orlando, north into Volusia County, along the Nature Coast, where those 10 to 15-inch rain totals might fall, there's a high risk of flash flooding. These high-risk events are rare. They're not issued very often. You don't see this pink color on the flash flood risk map very often. Saw a lot of it before Helene, though. So I do want to caution you to take the flood risk very seriously. Flooding is just as serious and deadly a risk as surge or wind. In fact, it's deadlier than wind, and more people die from flash flooding by far than wind in hurricane threats. So take the flood threat seriously. Don't drive into flood water of any depth. And if you live in a low-lying area and you're receiving guidance from an emergency manager to get out, you probably should think about what's happened in the last 2 weeks and take that to heart. The timing of the rain, again, this is going to be a multi-day event. We're going to see rainfall increasing through the overnight hours across west central, southwest Florida. This is early tomorrow morning. We're seeing banding coming in. We'll see several bands cross through South Florida during the day tomorrow. Rainfall expands north across covering central Florida and north central Florida by tomorrow evening. Through the overnight hours as the hurricane comes in and makes landfall, the early hours of potentially early Thursday morning, that rain will continue. Heaviest rainfall perhaps Thursday morning as Milton crosses central Florida and then clearing out Thursday afternoon in west central Florida, Thursday evening, east central Florida, and then not much behind it for Friday will dry out in the wake. So final word tonight, it's hard to really grasp the different threats here because this is not a normal track for hurricanes. It's not something we have a lot of historical reference points to. This is every hurricane that has made landfall between basically north part of Charlotte Harbor and the southern Nature Coast, so Pasco County down to Sarasota County. There's only 5 hurricanes that have ever made landfall in this part of the coastline in the past 170 some odd years. And only one, the 1921 Tarpon Springs hurricane, a Cat 3, that was made landfall as a major hurricane, a Cat 3, 4, or 5. The rest, these yellow lines, those are Cat 1s, orange is a Cat 2. So having a hurricane approach west central Florida from the southwest or west southwest, very unusual. And that's why this is something where you need to follow the guidance of emergency managers and not your own personal experience because, as I said last night, if you weren't alive in 1921, you don't really have a good understanding of what surge of this magnitude looks like on this part of the west central Florida coast. And that could include Tampa Bay. I think it's very likely to include areas from Sarasota down to Charlotte Harbor, as seeing just devastating, catastrophic surge, and then also this Sarasota-Bradenton area where landfall is most likely to occur. That's also an area that's going to get severe catastrophic surge. We'll see if the track can slip to your south, but if not, that surge is coming for you as well. Okay, how high? I'm going to take some questions before I clock out tonight. try to get some rest. I advise you all to do the same because next day and a half are going to be long. How high will the wind gusts be in Miami? Not very high. I think maybe a few wind gusts to 40 miles per hour. You're under a tropical storm warning. Watch out for that tornado risk. Keep a means of receiving a tornado warning on hand and be ready to take shelter if you get a warning. But otherwise, I don't think we're going to be looking at damaging winds across South Florida. And that's true of North Florida as well. If you're, I don't know, north of Lake City, if you're in the Panhandle, this is not going to be a damaging wind event for you either. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. Gosh, I mean, we have a Category 5 hurricane out in the Gulf of Mexico. It's heading for Florida. It's going to build up a wall of water in front of it. Any last-minute changes in intensity, they're not going to impact the existence of that wall of water. It's coming for West Central and Southwest Florida. You need to get out of its way. I advise you take, if you're still looking to evacuate, it's still safe to do so. It doesn't really become unsafe to be on the roads, I'd say, until maybe midday tomorrow. Got to watch out for those flood risks as the precip kicks in. I don't want to send people out into a flood. But you have until basically midday tomorrow. So I'd advise you to get out of those low-lying coastal flooding, even inland flooding prone areas, because this is going to be something that we've not seen on this section of the West Central Florida coastline. We'll be watching those track adjustments tick by tick to see where it comes in, who gets that worst surge, but it's coming for somebody. All right, Florida, stay safe. Take care. This is Dr. Ryan Truchelut from WeatherTiger, weathertiger.com. Stick with us for the latest. I'll be back tomorrow to see you through the storm until it's over. Take care and good night.